It would have taken Emma Pleasant many hours to climb the slopes of Skiff Mountain to see her father, but the journey may have been worth it. Emma's father was a collier, a specialized craftsman, skilled in the art of creating charcoal to feed the region's massive iron industry. If Emma Pleasant ever went to visit her father in the mountains around Kent, it would have been with some trepidation. The 9th youngest child of Claudius Pleasant may have heard the stories of young boys who fell through collier mounds and were badly burned or even died in the simmering logs below. Her father was involved in dangerous work. Emma would have grown up surrounded by siblings in the small town of Kent, Connecticut. Claudius Pleasant had 18 children. For Emma, the home was full of life, but was absent one person. For her father, she would rarely see. Being a collier was a solitary life. One collier tending to a mound on the mountainside miles outside of town. The mound had to be constantly watched. If it burned too hot, the charcoal would burn up and be wasted. As a result, Claudius and many other colliers would only come down from the mountains perhaps once every 3 months.
Making charcoal was extremely dangerous. When you stop to think about it, you're basically playing with fire. It's not flame fire, but you're dealing with these hot coals. You have to keep that mound of smoldering charcoal going, which means just like you tamp your fireplace down or you poke it around, you're constantly messing with it. And sometimes little children were sent up on top of the charcoal mounds to jump up and down to just keep the air right. I don't know the total mechanics of it, but just to keep the fire going the way it needed to be. Other times the collier themselves would climb up. They'd put a ladder against the side, up they'd go, they'd jump up and down, and once in a while, you'd fall through. No. Dealing with the trees, cutting the trees down was dangerous. It was a very dangerous business, but very skilled job, and it paid very, very well. All the jobs in the iron industry were dangerous. Working in the furnace was dangerous. But my guess is that he just liked being out in the woods by himself, and he made good money, and he was good at what he did.
In the mid-1800s, the hillsides would be teeming with industry. One would see orange glows dotting the mountains, the blast furnaces belching out smoke, trees being felled for collier mounds, and carts and trains hauling away the finished products.
I know that Claudius Pleasant came from France. The French were the expert colliers, and the name is a French word. He came over here knowing how to do it, so he was able to get a job right away, and it probably enabled him to have 18 children. He got paid well. He enjoyed the job. He probably enjoyed the solitude out there.
Buried in ancient mountains, the iron in this area was considered to be the best in the world. The industry was thriving.
There were a lot of changes. A lot of people came in. People forget that the population here in the late 1700s in the 7 towns up here in the northwest corner was just about twice as much as the city of Hartford at that point. So you've got more people living here, that's the use of more materials. Of course, Hartford only had about 5,500 people then, so what they had here was about 11,000 altogether.
On the hot summer evenings, Emma may have been reminded of her father, as the smells of many charcoal mounds scattered around the mountains drifted into town.
Well, they said that in the old days, at nighttime, you could see fires burning on the hillsides, just the red glow at night.
Emma might have climbed out the window onto the roof at night, long after her mother and siblings had gone to bed, and picked out which distant fire of the many glowing in the hillsides surrounding the town belonged to her father.
Extrapolate something that would be a meaningful mound, it takes a long time for that to smolder down to charcoal. So if you got one up and going, let that get going, you check it a little bit, then you build another one, get that started. So you could have 3, 4, 5, however proficient a collier you were, And you would spend your entire time going and checking and making sure that it wasn't burning too hot and it hadn't gone out. So you probably didn't sleep a good 8 hours at night. You were up and down and up and down and up and down. Because if it caught on fire and you lost all your wood, you were sunk.
Today, the forests in this region are dotted with signs of this once flourishing iron industry. Deep in the woods, signs of collier activities can be spotted by a keen eye. Darkened dirt or an old mound.
And so now we're standing on the top of the mound, and you can see that this is pretty dark. You can dig around in the dirt a little bit and get down to some really black earth. No question about it, but this is because of the charcoal dust. This is your first charcoal mound.
Local historian Marge Smith has a passion for telling the story of the Colliers in Kent.
That actually looks like coal. No, that's charcoal. The men were brought over initially from France, and Claudius, we learned, came over at the age of 18, paid his own way on the ship all by himself. 14 years old. 14 years old, paid his way on the ship by chopping vegetables in the ship's kitchen. All by himself to this country, but he had that skill. His ancestors must have been colliers. He knew what he was doing. So he quickly found a job and he ended up in Kent.
I think the first time I ever hiked those trails thinking about iron was after I had met Ed Kirby, so that would have been about 20 years ago. And he taught me how to really look into the woods and see the charcoal mounds. And I realized when I was hiking the trails in Macedonia one day, oh, there's one, there's another one, just like when the students came with me.
And here we are. Home. Home in the woods. This has to be a collier's hut. I'm not 100% sure. During the time that the Macedonia furnace was working, this was definitely Kent Iron Company property. Claudius would have been operating over in Kent Hollow. He's the collier about whom we know the most personal details. Plunking him down on this other side of town, this is how he would have lived if this had been his. End of the day, and the kids coming up and finding him and sitting down with him, and probably would have been 6 or 7 kids each at given times. I mean, he had children over a course of 25 years, I think. He was very, very well known in Kent Hollow. In fact, our old friend Kai Anderson, who just died at age 90-something a year ago, said that her aunt remembered meeting him. And he would go around with a nice long loaf of bread under his arm, and he would break off pieces of bread to share with people, and he'd say, "Pleasant's my name and pleasant's my nature." And everybody agreed that he was like that. And for all I know, in the woods over near North Spectacle Lake, there could be other places like this. And this is just the only one that a trail happens to go right by. But Ed did say he's never seen anything like it. I mean, from the description I gave him. So they're not common. But this also tells me that this is somebody who was here for a long enough amount of time that he took the trouble to build this. So there are charcoal mounds out in the woods around here. There's no doubt in my mind.
When I walk through the woods around here, since I've started this investigation of the iron industry, I can't stop thinking about them. It's constant. I look around, I look at rocks and figure, well, they probably saw these rocks. If I see a really old tree, I'll wonder if that was a tiny little tree when they were there. The same views that they looked at. I look at the continuity of it all, and yet I see the changes. And I find myself wondering, what would they think if they could come back now and see the hiking equipment that I've got, see the car that I have to get myself to the trailhead. They had to live in the woods, but I mostly just sense their presence. I sense their footprints, I sense where they were. It's hard to put it into words, but it's a very strong, powerful feeling, and it keeps me going back.
When Emma reached her father's campsite, what would she have seen? Perhaps on this day, Emma would have noticed a sadness in her father's eyes. The hillsides, which were once dotted by massive forests, and many collier mounds, were mostly denuded by the mid-19th century. Colliers did not do much in the way of forest management. They found good trees, cut them down, and turned them into charcoal to feed the massive iron industry.
You have to realize Connecticut is 68% woodland, and it really has a lot of woods. At that time, there was not a lot of woods around here because they cut a great deal of it down for charcoal. Once you move a lot of people in, then you're getting in a situation where you need more buildings. So you're cutting more trees down. So the area was pretty well denuded of trees in lots of places. For example, I can remember as a kid back in the 30s, if I was going down into Cornwall Bridge from Sharon on Route 4, and I looked at the hills across the way, they were still all bare over there. They hadn't grown up yet.
The forested hillsides, which had become an iconic part of this region, at the time would have been nearly barren. The supply of trees which had fed this industry was becoming more and more difficult to get.
But they finally eventually did cut everything down, and it was one of the reasons that the iron industry failed here, because they weren't marshaling their crop very well.
Out west, there was something new. Deep in the mountains of places like West Virginia, plentiful supplies of coal had been discovered. The industry gradually began moving west.
And it's an old cliche to say if you don't know where you've come from, you're going to make, if you don't know the mistakes that people have made in the past, you're going to make them in the future. If you don't know where you've come from, you don't really have a good idea of where you could go.
We turned our backs on the ravaged forests and set our sights on coal, a cheap, practical alternative. What could possibly go wrong?
It was cheaper at one point to be importing coal here than to going way out in the woods and trying to make charcoal and what few trees were left. So they just decided to pick up and move the business out there. When the iron industry folded, there were a lot of out-of-work Colliers. It was distressing. I mean, maybe if they'd been able to harvest and maintain trees, plant more trees, it might have lasted. A lot of them moved away, but a lot of them, and this is one of my favorite stories, became dairy farmers.
What we have here environmentally today is wonderful. Actually, I don't feel that the iron industry did that much damage to it. It did some, of course, but it seems to have recovered from that. Two things that are very important is that protecting the environment the way it is and making it even better, and also having students have an understanding of the history that actually led to the development of this area. And the iron industry was a major factor in that. There were hardly any people here in the period before the iron industry got started. First forge was in Lime Rock in 1735, and we didn't have any towns then. Sharon started in 1739, I think Salisbury in 1741. They were all in that period. So the iron industry really is a very important part of our history, and I think we should know more about that and about what industry was helpful and what industry did to the area as well.